everybody, and welcome to the Schools Forum for the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. In line with government guidance that everyone should stay at home as much as possible, this meeting is being held via Microsoft Teams, live conferencing, and all forum members, council officers, and the parties who wish to participate in this meeting are joining from remote locations. The event is also being streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public and the media are welcome to follow the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions taking place. As this is a virtual meeting, I would like to run through some housekeeping for all participants. Can all parties participating ensure that they remain on mute unless they are called to speak? When you do speak, please feel free to put your camera on if you like, and if you do wish to speak at any point, please indicate this by the raise your hand function on Teams. If for any reason your connection drops out and you miss something, please can you let us know? And in the event that my connection drops, I nominate Alison Mould to take over the meeting as the Vice Chair. I would now like to introduce myself and fellow committee members. So my name is Andrew O'Neill and I am going to be chairing this committee. I'm going to begin with members of the Schools Forum, and obviously if you can say your name, say the school or the party that you're representing, and then also say that you are whether or not you're a member of the forum. So Jagdeep, start with you.
Jagdeep Birdie, I'm Executive Head Teacher at Colville and Marlborough Primary Schools, and I'm a member of the forum.
Katie Blackler, Katie, you here? Okay, Catherine, I don't think Katie's here, so could you note that down? We haven't had apologies. Sarah?
Oh, yes. Hi, Sarah Newman, Director of Children's Services, member of Forum.
Thank you, Sarah. And also to another Sarah, Sarah Bouette. Okay, Sarah's not here at present. She usually attends, so we just might want to check that in case there's been some issues.
Sorry, it's Kathleen. She is here. I can see her on the guest list.
Hi, yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I'm just finding it really hard to find the little buttons, but yeah, hello.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Really good to see you. And David.
Good evening, everyone. David Sellens, Thomas Jones School in Ladbroke Grove. And yes, I am a member of the forum. Thank
you, David. And Kathleen?
Hi, I'm Kathleen Williams. I'm Executive Head at Servat and St Francis of Assisi, and I am a member of the forum.
Thanks, Kathleen. On to primary school governors. Peter?
I'm Peter Bassett, Governor of Avondale and St Anne's Federation of one primary and one nursery school, and member of the forum.
Thank you, Peter. Alison.
Hi, I'm Alison Mould. I'm Vice Chair of the forum and a member and Chair of Governors at Park Walk Primary School.
Thank you, Alison. Chris.
Hello, I'm Chris Blewett. I'm Chair of Governors at Oxford Gardens and a member of the forum.
Thank you, Chris. We move on to the secondary schools. Amanda.
Oh, good evening. Amanda Sayers, Chair of Governors at All Saints Catholic College and a member of the forum.
Thank you, Amanda. On to now Kensington Aldridge. David, are you there?
I'm here, Andrew, and I think I'm not on mute. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is David Benson. I'm Principal of Kensington Aldridge Academy.
Thank you, David. And Mariella?
Hello, I'm Lucian Boyd-Hart. I'm standing in for Mariella at Chelsea Academy, Director of Finance and Operations, and Mariella, or Chelsea Academy, is a member.
Thank you, Lucian. Nice to have you here. And Stephen at the Cardinal Vaughan.
Hello, I'm Stephen Keogh. I'm from Cardinal Vaughan Memorial School and a member.
Thank you, Stephen. Shamsa at Holland Park. Okay, I don't believe Shamsa is here. Catherine, if you could just note that. Then we move on to special schools. Jeanette. Okay, I don't think Jeanette's here, is she? No. If we move on then to the nursery schools, Maria Arana.
Hello, it's Maria Arana. I'm the representative of the state nursery schools, and I'm a governor at Chelsea Open Air Nursery School. And I'm a member of the forum.
Brilliant, thank you, Maria. And representing the pupil referral units, do we have Wasim from TBAP?
Hi, Andrea. Wasim Butt, TBAP principal.
Brilliant, thanks, Wasim. Nice to see you. Non-schools, RBKC councillors, Councillor Atkinson, are you present?
Yes, I am. I'm here as a member of the forum. I'm a councillor. I'm also a governor of Servite School.
Thanks. Councillor Aretti.
Present, councillor of Holland Ward, and I'm a member of the forum. Thank you.
Many thanks. Councillor Evans.
Good evening. Janet Evans, Courtfield Ward, Chair of Family Services Select Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. We move on to PVI Forum. Kitty Mason.
Hi, yes, I represent the private, voluntary and independent nurseries in the borough, and I'm a member of the forum.
Thank you, Kitty. Nice to see you. We still have a vacancy for the 14 to 19 partnership. We have got a number of observers here. I'm not sure we will be able to introduce everybody, but I think there are some people who will be presenting and speaking this evening, so we will try and introduce those. So if we start with Ian Heggs.
Good evening, everyone. Ian Heggs, Director of Education, and I'm an officer in attendance. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ian. And on to Anita.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Anita Stokes. I'm the Strategic Finance Manager for Children's Services and an officer in attendance.
Many thanks, Anita. Julie.
Hello, Julie Ely. I'm the Assistant Director for Special Educational Needs and Educational Psychology. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. And Jackie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jackie Saddington, Head of School Governor Services, and I'm an officer in attendance.
Many thanks, Jackie. So I've introduced those in attendance who are likely to be presenting papers linked to the agenda this evening. Okay, so if we move on to the agenda and if we start with the first part, item A1, apologies for absence. At present, we have only had apologies from one person, and that was Kevin Jackson at St Thomas More Language College in Chelsea. Catherine, have you received any more apologies later today?
No, I haven't.
Okay, many thanks. David, you've just put your hand up. Can I just, are you?
Yeah, I mean, technically, Katie sends her apologies. But this is something my peers and I raised a while ago, which is that when we get into the autumn, we will attempt to ensure that there is somebody who comes to the meetings frequently. Katie's, very committed, but she made it very clear a while ago to her peers through in the appropriate forum, which was consultative. That this is something that she'd stepped away from. But as I say, my peers and I, we will ensure that for the autumn, we have full representation going forward.
Okay, all right, thank you, David. I think this may be touched upon later in the meeting in a part that Jackie's going to talk about, but yes, that's really helpful, thank you. If we move on to item A2, declarations of interest. Do the other members have any declarations to make? Okay, I will take that as a no for the time being. If we move on to item A3, minutes of the meeting on the 18th of January 2021. It was an extensive meeting, and it was also that there was a huge amount of discussion in relation to the formula options. Many thanks to Catherine for putting these together and trying to condense what was in quite a difficult format on Teams, such an extensive conversation and discussion around those. So thank you, Catherine. Are there any items on this, on the minutes, that anybody would like to raise? Amanda.
Thank you. I don't know whether you want me to raise it now or later under item A10. It's a matter arising from item A5, which was the report that I gave to Forum from the ISOS Strategic Working Group.
I think that's something that we're coming on to ISOS, so it might make sense to try and put it into that item there. So if you could bring that back up then, Amanda, that would be fantastic. Are there any other comments or matters that anybody would like to raise in relation to the minutes from the 18th of January? Okay, thank you. Is it your wish that they be signed as a correct record if you raise your hands? Right, fantastic, thank you. I think that's it. I think that's the majority of hands that have been raised, so many thanks for that. We move now on to item A4, which is a proposed training session. So I'm going to hand it over to Jackie for this, and this is an oral update. Jackie.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everybody. I've been working with Catherine, your clerk to the Forum, since she took over as clerk, and also Andrew took over as chair. So I've been working at them, looking at the membership, and proposed that a training session I thought would be really useful. And out of that discussion, looking at a training session for all members. So what I'm proposing is just looking at the membership with Catherine, which we can bring back to the next meeting and clarify terms of office and the Constitution, but then following on from that, in the autumn term, running a session for members on their roles and responsibilities and their powers and responsibilities for the Forum. So that's what I'm proposing. It's really over to you, Andrew, or if anyone's got any questions.
Yes, certainly. I'm not sure if Ian wanted to step in at this point as well. Ian, I know that you and Jackie have discussed this and looked at it in detail.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. I think two things to say. I mean, we hope the offer of training would be helpful, and recognise that we have some new members on Forum, but obviously some colleagues are very well experienced at Forum, so may not be for everybody, but we hope that offer is helpful, and I think it should, as Jackie has flagged, be useful for us all going into a discussion perhaps at the next meeting around membership, and to seek everyone's views about how we might move forward there.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And I think one of the things that we discussed since the last meeting, I think there's a number of things that will come up in the light of the last meeting. But this was kind of a separate discussion around lots of new members and training. But I think Jackie has worked with Westminster and looked at their constitution, and that has sparked a look at how things operate in RBKC. I think the feeling was, and certainly my feeling was, that it would be better to try and do this in the summer term, and if it were possible, if the rules allow it in the summer, if we could find a space big enough to host members and have a combination of online and a live meeting, we thought it would be more beneficial to have that conversation with people face to face, as opposed to in this sort of virtual format. So it's something that we think we'll look a little bit further down the line. I can see that David has raised his hand here, and any other comments or suggestions from forum members, most welcome. David, over to you.
Yeah, I welcome this. I think this is really positive. Thank you to Jackie for executing it. I wouldn't for a moment contest the fact there is a slight difference between training and continual professional development, but I think there are some overlaps, and they are both beneficial. I take Ian's point. I think it's valid. There are some very experienced, highly skilled, insightful individuals who are regular attendees at Forum and have been for a long time. But I think we all, in varying degrees, benefit from revisiting the core elements of what should be the values of a strong forum. And I think nobody would contest that is what we desire. So I'm not speaking there on behalf of my peers by any means, but my own view is that this is a positive. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And Chris?
Yes, sorry, I've lost my thing. Just to echo what David's just said, actually, I don't think we want to go into this looking at people new to it. I think the whole issue is about everybody reviewing how the committee works and looking at behaviours. So I think it needs to start from the same starting point, rather than a way of actually encouraging new people to adopt an existing culture, really, I would say.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Chris. Any other comments from members? Okay, great, many thanks. Sorry, I just heard, I don't know who that was, sorry.
It's Kitty Mason, and
hi, Kitty.
I have raised, but you don't seem to see it. Can you see my hand raised?
I can't. You're at the top of the list of people now, but I can't see your hand up. But there. Oh yes, I can. Sorry, yes, I can.
Okay. It's just that. Is there any written information anywhere where? Because when I joined, which was a considerable amount of time ago, I wasn't aware of any written information of how what our roles and responsibilities were. And things were rather different in those days, and we could certainly, it's a brilliant idea to have some training on roles and responsibilities. But it'd be nice to know if there's anything already out there that we can refresh ourselves on.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Kitty. I can see Jackie's got her hand up. Just one thing to say that there is quite an extensive and useful, really well detailed document that is on the DFE about schools forums in every local authority and how they should run, how they should be constituted, how they should operate. But as we well know in forum discussions, I totally take Chris's point as well around culture and David's point about how we want to operate with a sense of collegiality. But there's also the technical side of understanding a lot of data and information and processing that to make decisions too. Jackie, I think this is something that you were planning. If I just hand over to you, you might be able to give a little bit more detail without giving everything, I suppose, away in this meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Yes, Kitty, there is operational guidance that came out a couple of years ago, and Andrew touched on that I've been through this process that I did for Westminster, where I clerked the schools forum, and I looked at the Constitution, and I actually looked at the Kensington Constitution as well to see whether that was up to date, and it is pretty up to date. But I always think it's good practice to check. So it's based around the operational guidance. There are separate table on powers responsibilities, which is what I would base the training around. So it would be looking, is your constitution up to date? Is your membership up to date? And then looking at the powers and responsibilities, and that's where the training session would come in. But there's quite a lot there, and the Constitution is based on that operational guidance.
Thank you, Jackie. Kathleen.
Hi. There is a constitution, and I think the issue when it was raised is that the constitution doesn't match the current membership as it stands.
And that's what I was working on with Catherine. So it all sort of fits in looking at the constitution, the operational guidance. As I say, I did this process with Westminster last year, and with Catherine coming in new and Andrew coming in, it seemed a good time because part of my role is also advising around the schools forum. So it will be very much based on looking at your constitution, your membership and the guidance.
Okay. Amanda.
This isn't actually a sort of constitutional point, but what I would say is, as people know, I've been sort of around Kensington and Chelsea for a while as a governor, and it's always seemed to me that the people who sit on this forum are the ones that can be cajoled into joining. I think we would do well to discuss the work of this forum at boards and make sure that governors, as part of other training, maybe when you become a chair of a governor or something like that in the training through the LA, you understand what the forum does and how you might help the education of children through membership of this forum, such that it won't always be the same faces on all of these things. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. I think that is something that Jackie will be doing as part of what the plans are, and also I think it touches a little bit on a paper that Anita and Ian are going to present later on in item A9. So really useful and really good direction that we seem to be going in on this. So thank you, everybody. If we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item A5, the deficit management plan. Anita, I think over to you on this.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, so this paper includes the main details of the deficit management plan that we need to submit to the DFE in relation to the size of our deficit and how we're trying to manage that deficit. So just talking about the figures to start with, we had a cumulative DSG deficit at the end of March 2020 of 4.9 million. And elsewhere on the agenda, you'll see that we estimate this deficit to increase by nearly 2.4 million in this financial year. The deficit management plan is a very extensive document. It's got 20 pages in full, in all, and we've pulled out the main appendices here, which are A, B and C, so it includes the detailed figures that we've put in. It includes the management commentary and details of the actions that we have taken. Forum will remember that we've been talking about the deficit position for some time, and the actions actually go back to January 2019. Items that have been through the High Needs Review Group, which has worked very effectively, and then mitigating actions that have been agreed via the forum. And that is reflected in in table 2 in the report, which is under item 2.1, which shows that by the time we get to 2024, we expect the in-year deficit to be 484,000, and while it's still very significant, we're expecting to have a deficit cumulative position of nearly 10.8 million. However, one of the key things to say is that if we hadn't taken the corrective action in liaison with the High Needs Group and the forum, we think we'd have an in-year deficit of nearly 3.8 million, and we'd have a cumulative deficit of 24.8 million. So that is evidence of the action that has been taken already. Item 5 covers the main pressures, which I think the forum are very aware of in terms of the Children and Families Act and the new unfunded responsibilities for the particularly young people aged 19 to 25. I wasn't going to run through those, but it may be that Julie wants to add some further points about the actions that have been taken. So I'll just pause there.
Julie, do you want to come in?
Thank you. I think the point that I'd want to highlight is the work that's going on to develop new provision and the partnership with host schools that have put themselves forward to say that they will be schools that will develop the specialist resource provision on behalf of all of the children in the Kensington and Chelsea, and that new provision is going to enable us to keep more children in local schools. So I think that would be the point I'd want to flag up. Thank you.
And we're happy to take any questions, comments.
Great, thank you. Alison.
I had two questions, if I can. Firstly, as someone fairly new to School Forum, is this common? Do all local authorities have an overspend? Because it seems frightening. I mean, the reduction is great, but it seems frightening that we're starting from such a large figure. I understand the reason why that's happened from your report. And secondly, I wondered if you had a feel for the amount of the 18 to 25-year-olds that would be taken by social care and their budget. I appreciate there's research to be done there, but I wondered if you had an ish figure which you could help us with.
Yeah, thank you for the questions, Alison. So there are a significant number of local authorities that have DSG deficits, and a significant number that have a much higher deficit than we do in Kensington and Chelsea. Not to mean that we shouldn't be concerned about it, but certainly in London, the majority of local authorities have got deficits. And then in relation to your second question and how much we think the social care costs could be, we have started to go through those and to have the discussions with our colleagues in adults. And I think we're not, I mean, this is not something that's going to have a material difference on it. We might be talking about a couple of 100,000, maybe slightly higher per year. I think I've answered the questions you raised.
Yeah, thank you, Anita. Peter?
Thank you. Two questions as well. Firstly, has this deficit plan been agreed with the borough treasurer? Oh, sorry, I'm an old man of the old school. I don't know whether you still have a borough treasurer, but it seems to me we're going to be drawing on the centre for additional funds for some years before paying down the balance. And secondly, elsewhere on this agenda, item A6, there's an under accrual provision for this year of 925,000 for past years. Is there any further provision in these figures for under accruals, or do you reckon you've got them all now?
So in relation to your first question about our director, our chief finance officer, that's
what he's called, right?
So that has gone through Mike, and I don't know if I don't know if Taryn is on the line. Who's one of the finance directors. I can't see if she's there. She's got a meeting with CCG. She was hoping to join us. You're right in terms of whether it's a potential call on, I guess, the cash flow for the council, and we will be having a meeting with the DFE about our deficit, and about one of the things that we will be talking about is how we manage that cash flow issue and how we deal with this going forward. So that's a very good point. And the second question about the under accruals, which is a very good point to raise, because it has been an issue that as we do more and more digging, we find, even though we contacted the providers at the end, going into closing last year, we're finding more and more, as you see from the figures, that they didn't advise us they were going to bill us. Our systems didn't have all the financial information on them, and we're working on that. SEN and finance are working closely on that. So we've got the full figure as it is now, and all of it, when we've got, we're going forward to 24, 25, there's obviously an awful lot of estimates in there. So I do hope that we have got all of those, a reasonable estimate for those under accruals in there. Sorry, when I say I do hope, I believe that we have got a reasonable estimate.
Okay, well, that's the best you can do. Thanks very much.
I see that.
Sorry, Anita. Thank you,
Yeah,
Peter.
sorry,
Anita.
Yeah, sorry. I thought I saw Taryn had joined, but she hasn't.
Okay. Chris?
Yes, thank you. Hello, Anita. In relation to commissioning specialist provision at 5.7 in its entirety and 5.8, can you put a bit of narrative around what that actually looks like in relation to outreach and training and maximising spare physical capacity in primary schools?
I know someone who would be far better able to answer that question. Julie?
Thank you. So in terms of capacity, we're looking at 2 of the schools that currently host provision with a view to increasing the number of places that they can take. So 2 of our existing primary schools where we know the practice is excellent, and we're asking them, can they stretch their reach? So positive discussions there. We're also looking at secondary schools to see if we can develop new provision in secondary schools, and obviously we're looking at schools where it's not going to require major capital development, because then there's capital cost and there's a delay in establishing that. So expressions of interest have been received from schools, and we're working with them on proposals. They'll be subject to consultation with the parents of the children who are currently at those schools, and then with the wider community to say, do you think that this is a good idea? This is the proposal that we're putting forward. And in terms of outreach and inclusion, what we want to be able to do is bring together those provisions that host the specialist skills and the outreach service that we already have in the Borough Inclusion Service, and look at how we can dovetail that in terms of workforce development for the wider workforce. But one of the really positive developments around that is when our new special school for children with autism opens in September, Kensington Queensmill. At the moment, we commission some outreach from Hammersmith Queensmill. We will have our own special school to be able to access. So, that increases immediately the capacity that we've got.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Julie, for that. Kathleen?
I just wanted to ask, I've heard some other local authorities have had quite large sums to support the deficit. I know I've heard Hammersmith and Fulham have just had 20 million over 4 years. Did we apply for any of that?
So that's a really good question, Kathleen, and thank you. So part of the process is us submitting this fully detailed deficit management plan, and certainly when we have the discussion with the DFE, that is one of the issues that we will be raising. Where's our share of this funding to help us manage this figure? And Sarah may wish to add further comments on this.
Absolutely. Kathleen, what we need to understand is the agreement that Hammersmith and Fulham made with the DFE in order to claw back some of that money, but absolutely keen to put K&C in the best position moving forward.
Yeah, agreed. I suppose what we want minuted is that as a forum, we want to lobby the DFE for whatever they're getting, basically, because that's what we need, because there isn't enough money in the pot, and that's the problem. So, Kathleen, thank you very much for raising that. That is really useful. Kitty.
The Golborne and Maxilla have a nursery provision for 10 children with autism. Are all those places taken up? in other words, are they maximising they have a provision, but it doesn't say whether they're
currently full. Yeah, I can confirm, Kitty, they are currently full.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Kitty. Kathleen, you've got your hand up. Is that you got another question? Oh, thank you. You put your hand down. Thanks. Okay. Any more questions on this paper? Jagdeep, over to you.
I kind of wanted to carry on with what Kathleen just raised. Really, it was we felt like, I don't know if it was a coded response that we just got back, or whether it was just a kind of a half response. I'm not very clear as to how they got the money, and what we need to do to get that money. And do you know, or is it a big secret?
There was not a bidding process. We're not entirely clear how they got that money. We think it was probably part of a discussion with the DFE about their deficit management plan. That this is all just, what seems to maybe a logical process, but there definitely wasn't a bidding process. And how much the DFE expected this to be in everyone to be aware of it, obviously we don't know. But now that we are aware, we will certainly be pushing to receive some funding.
So they set a precedent.
Yes.
That's great news.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jagdeep. Ian.
Yeah, just very briefly, Jagdeep, you raised a very sensible point, as Kathleen does as well. I think, Julie, you were the one that found some information published discreetly on the DFE website, which sets out some brief details about some of these agreements. They're described in DFE language as safety valve agreements. So I think we've been absolutely upfront with you, Jagdeep, in saying that we'd like to find out a bit more about these agreements, but clearly, as Anita says, the process is to submit the plan, and then that discussion about the plan enables us to raise that point about the safety valve mechanism. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. I think if you look on some of the publications on the DFE, you do see some of these notifications and publications coming out, and there seems no rhyme or reason to them other than that they seem like deals that have been made, as opposed to, because presumably, Anita, if they went out and asked or set out formal applications for local authorities to balance their deficits, they would get it from nearly every single local authority in the country. And they just don't have they can't really empty the valves completely of the DFE treasury. So I imagine that it will be a contextual argument. Kathleen.
It was just to say that it was an item at the forum at Hammersmith and Fulham. So I think it's pretty transparent in terms of what it means. And I understand as well that it's over 4 years. So there will be some kind of guarantees, I guess, or agreements in place, because I think it's being released over a period of 4 or 5 years, the money. So I'm sure that there's some sort of criteria attached.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. Thank you, Kathleen. Okay, right, thanks everybody. Well, that was paper A5, and I asked the committee to note this report. We move on now to the next item on the agenda, which is item A6, which is the DSG 2021 budget monitoring. And Anita, back to you.
Thank you. So the DSG allocation has not changed at all since the last report in January, and the variances for our forecast end of year position have not changed on the early years block or the schools block and central schools block, but high needs forecast has go up, and that ties in with the issue that Peter raised earlier about the under accruals in relation to previous years, and the ongoing work that we are doing, SEN and finance are doing, to make sure that we've got as much finance data as we can about the individual placements. And they were the main points that I wanted to draw out from the paper, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Anita. Any questions on paper A6? Okay, Alison, over to you.
Sorry, just a quick one. Servicing of schools forum is listed in table 2 at 46,000. That seems an awful lot of money to run schools forum. Am I being unfair?
Interestingly, this question came up at the last forum, so I don't think it's an unfair question to raise. It's the support in terms of for running the meetings, the officer time, governor services, some of finance time for producing the statutory reports that we have to produce. Also, the work that we're doing in relation of the strategic review as agreed by the forum by ISOS. So they're the items in main that pays for. It's just these are the set headings by some of the set headings from the DFE. So they're not necessarily headings that we would necessarily use.
Okay, thank you, Alison and Anita there. Kitty?
What happens to the contingency money for the early years block of the 2 to 4 year olds?
Well, so it's part of the overall position. So if there's an underspend on that contingency money, at the moment, that projected underspend is feeding into is helping us not to have an even higher overall deficit, as has previously been agreed by the forum. So it's within that overall early years block.
Yeah, and just to note on that, I think we've been over this over several meetings over the past 2 years. Given how deep the deficit is, we have to be demonstrating as a forum to the DFE that we are doing everything that we can where possible to help reduce some of that. Kitty,
Yes.
if you want to come back there.
Yes, I understand. I just don't. I'd like to be able to assure my colleagues in early years that we're not making a bigger contribution than all the rest of the educational sector. So, yeah.
Anita, can you offer some assurances there?
Yes, we've got, so within the schools block, there's a very clear line of the agreed contribution to the deficit recovery from the schools of 346,000 in the current year, and that's a similar figure going forward in the deficit management plan, and it's a similar figure that it has been for the last 3 years. So yeah, there has been significant contributions from the mainstream schools.
Early years contributes twice, though. It contributes in whatever the leftover from the the contingency, and also from the Senate, whatever's left over there, because it's you underspend. So we are contributing to the budget in 2 different areas.
Yeah, I suppose on the early years block, we don't have the facility to. Well, we could either agree it up front, but we don't go in planning each year to have a contribution from the early years block, but just any overall underspend on the early years block has then fed into to help with the deficit position. So I just say it's the early years in total. It's not sort of planned as to which areas it would come from.
No, but I just looking at the figures, it would appear that the early years block is providing more of more money than perhaps others per capita, and early years are, well, like we all are, hurting in terms of finances.
So I can see that this year that that is what we can see in the figures, but in previous years I don't think that has been the case. So I think if we looked at it overall, that wouldn't be the case. But I understand the point that Kitty's making.
I'm sorry. I think this is Robert Atkinson. Can I ask you to look at that, because I think there is a pattern, and I think it has gone back over several years. I do agree with Kitty. It does seem to me that early years is paying more for the reason she's already given than say the mainstream ordinary schools.
Yeah, we can certainly go back and look at that. We have had it in previous forum reports in terms of what was going into the deficit plan, but we can certainly do a summary on that.
If you would, please.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, just so that we can get absolute clarity on this, because I think it has come back a couple of times. If we have this as a specific action,
and there hasn't been a satisfactory answer, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, Maria.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I suppose it is kind of also supporting what Kitty was saying in terms of, certainly in terms of the whole early years sector. The difficulty is that we have gotten some extra support, but that support is now ending. So, I mean, I'm sure that, you know, there could be many schools, primary and secondary, that are looking at kind of going into the red next year. I would be very sorry if that is the case. Certainly Chelsea Open Air is looking to be going into the red next year, because our per hour pupil cost will not cover our costs. So it's just recognizing that year on year, there has always been money from contingency, money from SEN that has gone unspent at the same time as our per hour per pupil cost is not sufficient. And I know that, Andrew Tagg, when he was here, always said, well, you were always campaigning with DFE, if nursery schools could become listed as small schools and get that extra 100,000, we would all be fine. But obviously that hasn't happened yet. So it's recognizing that, the impact on us is very great. Thank you.
Yeah, Anita, do you want to come back on that as well?
I think that the key thing is coming back with the contributions to the deficit plan. Obviously, the early years, we are very transparent in terms of the allocation that we receive from the DFE and how we then allocate it. As we get a number of questions from this, perhaps we need to look at how we set out this information for going forward for future forums as well, when we go through that budget setting process. Yeah. We would, like we do with the mainstream schools, we'd be happy to support maintain nurseries if they need help in terms of budget setting difficulties.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. That's it will be good to get that clarity for forum members probably at the next meeting. But also I think we have to acknowledge that we hear and understand the issues that Maria and Kitty are raising in the early years and the cost pressures that there are. Jagdeep.
When we look at the cost, the funding for primary schools and secondary schools, we have a spreadsheet and a forecast of how that might affect different schools, and that allows us to see the actual impact of our decisions. And I suppose, obviously, when you do nursery funding, it's slightly different because it's based on 3 censuses. It might be the case that you could still do a forecast figure, so that forum members can actually see the impact of our decisions. I think it would make it a bit more transparent.
I think that sounds like a good idea, Jagdeep. Yeah. I mean, you're right. The different censuses and pupil numbers can change, but I think anything that helps the forum in terms of making decisions, it sounds like a sensible idea.
Or even perhaps where you do the forecast and it's based on a nursery of different sizes, perhaps, so that they've got an idea. Yeah. So it's actually more evident. It's clearer, really, for forum members, the impact of these decisions. Because when you see it in hourly rates, it doesn't really have the same impact, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that was a good point to provide the same level of detail across our sectors, so that particularly for somebody like me and some secondary colleagues who are trying to understand some of these issues in more detail, I think that might help. And we've often tended, Jagdeep, you're right, to look at the hourly rate. Ian.
Thanks, Andrew. Yes, a couple of things. Just to bear out Anita's points in terms of, I mean, clearly we want to provide support across the whole early years sector, and I hope that colleagues feel that through the work Erasmus and the team are doing, we are able to provide that support and advice. But of course, we have that additional responsibility with our 4 maintained nursery schools, because they are maintained, and therefore, you know, the points Anita made about supporting with budget planning, you know, that's absolutely there, and obviously that's part of our joint duty, if you like, as part of Schools Forum, to provide that additional support for the nursery schools in terms of support and advice on budget planning.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Kitty?
The maintained nursery schools don't support the funded 2-year-olds, which are only getting £6 an hour and are being paid £6 an hour. And the private and voluntary sector, as well as the authority supported, well, actually Chelsea Open Air doesn't take 2-year-olds either, but I'm just saying that anybody who's taking 2-year-olds and is receiving £6 an hour is not covering the staff costs. And yet we are expected to do this, and we are doing it willingly. But we can't, every 50p helps. It makes the difference between going out of business and staying in business. And at the moment, we're really squeezed on what we get out of the DSG. And I'd like us to be mindful of how we're contributing to the budget deficit.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Kitty. Anita?
Yeah, if I could just come back on the 2-year-olds, we pass on 100% of the hourly rate that we receive from the DFE. We have to. We don't hold anything for contingency or towards the early years service. So that's a direct, and I do know that there are pressures in terms of the cost of the provision for 2-year-olds, but we pass that on in full.
Yes, but £6 doesn't cover the costs. Doesn't cover.
Yeah, and that's another thing that we continue to raise with the DFE, and I know the early years providers do too. So all we can do is to continue to do that lobbying.
Yeah,
it's just that maintained nurseries get a different amount per hour, and I'm not actually aware of how much it is, but there is a perceived unfairness.
No, maintained nurseries get the same hourly rate as all providers for 3 and 4-year-olds.
No, for 2-year-olds.
Maintained nurseries
don't get. Yes,
they get the same rate for 2-year-olds as everyone else.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Jagdeep. Oh, sorry, Maria had her hand up first there. Sorry, Maria.
Just to say that the Chelsea Open Air does take rising 3, so that in the term they become 3, so they are 2 at that point, and we get the same. It was great to hear that the provision that we looked at for Maxilla Goulburn for their 10 pupil SEN program was full. Just to say that, I mean, we've never had more SEN children ever than we've had, and I've been connected with the school for over 30 years, but we currently have 16, 5 EHC plans, 2 under assessment, 1 that we're about to submit an EHD plan, 8 that are getting SALT funding. I mean, you know, we are overwhelmed, and with SEN, we actually kind of pay first and then get some of the money back. So just to recognise, yes, we're being put under lots and lots of pressure, financially currently, and it'll only get worse next year.
Okay, thanks, Maria. I think these sound like issues that are important, but probably need to be addressed directly with officers outside of the forum, because we do need to focus on sticking to the agenda item, which is about the overall budget monitoring. So I think We'll bring some of the information to the next meeting, but some of the issues that you're raising now, I do think need to be held directly with the officers of the council. I've just got one question, Anita. It pertains to A5 and A6. When we got towards year end last year, you alerted the forum to issues around accounting that had made the deficit larger or appear larger on the balance sheet. I believe that a huge amount of work has been done over the past year to rectify that, but it's still an ongoing process.
That's correct. Yeah, and so the same issue that Peter raised, and that we are still finding. Well, we are still receiving bills that we hadn't estimated for. So every time, obviously, we find anything else, then we get the information onto the SEN system and we include it in all of our figures and all of our estimates. So yes, we've got fuller information and are getting more and more accurate on those estimates.
Okay, thank you. I think it's just an important thing to note that it's in previous meetings we had this as something that was finally tied down, but actually it's ongoing, and that process is improving, but will take some time. Right, in terms of paper A6, I realised I also didn't run through the recommendations for paper A5, but in terms of paper A6, recommendations in 4.1, Schools Forum is asked to note the 2021 DSG allocation of 73.275 million and a forecast overspend of 2.4 million. This will increase the DSG cumulative deficit from 4.9 million at the end of 2019-20 to 7 million by the end of 2021. All in agreement with the recommendation. Oh, that's just a note, sorry. And if I just go back to paper A5, many apologies, just to note the recommendations that we have here in part 7 of paper A5. Schools Forum is asked to in 7.1.1 agree the draft deficit management plan, and to note this reflects the continuation of the 0.5% transfer from the schools block to the high needs block at 0.362 million in the year 2022-23. In 7.1.2, to agree that the deficit is not cleared by the end of 24-25 due to the size of the cumulative deficit and the increasing cost pressures. The in-year position is expected to be 0.484 in 2024-25. And then recommendation 7.1.3, note that as detailed in section 6, the placement costs of 20 to 25-year-olds are being reviewed to ensure that care costs are changed to social care and not the DSG, and an update will be brought to a future meeting. Can I get agreement to the first two, 7.1.1 and 7.1.2? Amanda, you put your hand up. Is that a question or is that agreement? I think it might be an agreement. So could I have hands up to agree to those recommendations in paper A5? They were all discussed and noted by Anita within that paper, and I think we should also note that the work of the team and also of the working party and Julie's team in terms of ensuring that the deficit doesn't widen in the way that it very much could have done, as we saw in the unmitigated figures. If we move on now to paper A7, the early years funding for central elements, and Anita, are you leading on this one?
I'm going to ask Amit to lead on this one. Thank you.
So I see two hands up there before we continue. Maria, you had your hand up, and Peter, are they voting hands still? Okay.
They're voting hands.
Yeah, sorry, voting hand.
No problem. Amit, over to you.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so this paper just sets out the central elements and the supplementary funding in the early years block, and how much has been allocated to those elements for the last 2 years and the coming year. So the key points firstly, there's the 5% that's centrally retained, and that is used for a number of statutory duties that are carried out by the team in the local authority, and they're listed in 2.2. The deprivation supplementary funding is a mandatory supplementary fund that we're required to have, and that's been set for Kensington and Chelsea at 10% of the final provider rate for 3 to 4 year olds. The maximum we can set that at is at 10% of the total funding. At the moment for Kensington, that is around 4.5%. Then the CENIF is again another mandatory fund that we're required to have. In 2019-20, we had 300,000 in the CENIF, and there was an underspend on that amount, and so that was reduced in the current year to 150. And this is an area where there has been an increase in the use of this fund in the current year. And the final bit was around the maintained nursery supplement, which was introduced to offer some protection when the early years national funding formula was introduced. And the allocations again for the last 3 years are shown in the table there. But it's only been confirmed for the summer term for the next financial year so far. So we're waiting to see what that looks like beyond that. But yeah, I think those were the key points I wanted to raise, but happy to answer questions.
Okay, many thanks, Amit. We have a question from Kitty. Kitty, over to you.
Yes, my first question is, could we possibly, perhaps for the next meeting, have a breakdown of how the 5% is used, in what, how much, what percentage is in what areas, so that we've got a better idea of how that the 5% that's essentially retained. So that's question one. Question two is what percentage of children in the borough, or what in exact numbers, are receiving the deprivation funding? If we can have, because that'll change when parents have to be are being moved out of the borough, then there's a drop in the number of children who are deprived if they've changed the demographics by not having enough money for rent. So yes, I'd like to, if possible, see how many children, or what percentage of the number of children receiving that. And the maintained nurseries, how much is the supplement per hour, and what will happen if what is the contingency arrangement if it isn't paid after September? Because yeah, there will be a big gap, and all those children will will suffer. So yes, I think we just should discuss it. Okay, thanks, that's it.
Amit, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, so for the first question, we have the early years and childcare team, which provides those, or carries out those statutory duties, which is what the majority of that funding goes towards. Although, yeah, we can try and break it down further for next time. the deprivation is based on the IDACI bandings, which would include 45% of the children, and so yeah, it's on that basis. And the maintained nursery supplement, I think we'd hope that it would continue for the rest of this year, but we just don't know in what form or it hasn't been confirmed in what form that would be. I think.
Okay, thanks. I mean, Anita, did you want to come in at this point as well?
Yes, thanks for the responses, Amit. Just to say that in answer to the question about what figures are allocated for the maintained nursery supplement, they're shown in the table under 5.2. So it does show the total allocated across the 3 years. It's not an hourly rate; it's an actual figure, supplement figure. And I agree with Amit that we do expect this maintained nursery supplement to continue, but whether it might be. Maybe part of it might be changed slightly, but they're not going to. I don't believe the DfE would take away this funding in total. Maybe they'll do some minor changes to it, but we'll obviously, once we know more, we will come back to the forum with that.
Yeah, thank you, Anita, for that. Peter.
Thank you. Just to ask whether under 3 and 4, the nurseries have been advised of their allocation for the current financial year, and if so, has it all been paid?
Is that for the deprivation and the,
yes, for the deprivation and for CENIF?
Yeah, so for the current financial year, I think the final payments would be going out around now. So yeah, that payment should have gone out now, I think.
And just on an associated matter, St Anne's is still awaiting its pupil premium for the year. Can you let us know when that's going out, please?
Yeah, again, all the final payments would have gone out this week. So
this week, okay. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Peter. Maria.
Thank you. Yes, I was just seeking. It's very helpful to kind of know that the contingency is approximately 500,000, and it was great to have a list of what it is. But again, if that budget could be broken down, because we've never really seen exactly kind of those areas, exactly kind of what the budget looks like. So that would be really helpful if we could have that for next time. I believe that the kind of deprivation and Senate and pupil premium haven't yet been received at Chelsea Open Air, but I could be mistaken. But normally it doesn't arrive until kind of the very end of March. The nursery school supplement, could I just ask, so that isn't a per pupil amount, or is it?
No, it's not. It's an allocation
So could you explain what it's based on? Because I couldn't really understand. I mean, it was great to see a percentages, but even that is no clarity of exactly how much money that is. Could you explain that a bit more? The nursery, the supplement.
So it was based on the kind of baseline funding in 16-17 prior to the
16-17.
Yeah, in 2016-17 prior to the early years national funding formula being introduced. So it was based on that funding and offering protection to maintain nurseries. Yeah, when that was introduced.
Right. So it was based on Maxilla and Goulburn being two separate schools on two separate sites and not on a federated school on one site.
I think it's. I don't know whether. I don't know if anyone else can answer this, because unfortunately this is before Amit and myself's time. I don't know whether Ian might.
Ian, yes. Ian, are you able to?
Could you just, so I'm just as problem with reception, I'm getting my camera on. Could you just repeat the question? I do apologise, Andrew.
The question is about, Amit might want to clarify, or Anita, to do with the funding of Maxilla and Goulburn, and the funding rates being set in 2016-17 when they were on separate sites, and now they're on the same site. Maria, is that
yes, it was just really if the funding is based on 2 separate nursery schools or a federated nursery school based on in one venue, it would just be helpful to know to understand the kind of proportions of that extra supplement if it's not per pupil.
No, thank you. I'm happy to clarify that, and apologies. They are both Goulburn and Maxilla, whilst they are now on one site as a federation, that they are funded as 2 separate nursery schools, and when they're inspected by Ofsted, as with all federations, both settings are inspected concurrently, but they are separate settings, and so they receive separate budgets.
That's absolutely fine. I was just really wanting to clarify if the amount of the nursery school supplement was based on their kind of costs and their budgets when they were separate, as opposed to when they were, when they're now together. If it's not per pupil. If you see do you see the difference? Do you? I mean,
I do. I suppose all I would say, in terms of school organisation, nothing has changed. So they were 2 separate nursery schools with 2 separate Ofsted reference registration numbers, and they still are now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and they still have the same budget. The same budget now, functioning out of one building. It just seems surprising. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Atkinson.
Thank you. I mean, can I push it a bit further than that? Now, the more information we get about this, I think the more there is a case to look at this again. I mean, I recognise that legally, Maxilla and Goulburn are separate; they're inspected separately. But if you're looking at the costs, the fact that they're sharing a site would indicate to me that I mean, many of those costs are the same. So it looks to me as if they're getting 2 bites of the cherry, and without sort of launching a civil war here, these things are not quite the same. Similarly, I mean, St Anne's is now federated and on the same site as a primary school, whereas Chelsea Open Air is still by itself. So I mean, rather than sort of developing this further, when I recognise that the majority of the forum's participants are not necessarily interested in this, can I just say it looks to me that this needs looking at again, and perhaps the maintained nurseries should have a separate meeting about this, because if you're saying that the funding this was all established in 2016, it seems to me an awful lot has changed between then and now.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Atkinson. I'm just concerned we're veering, and I think you've acknowledged this yourself, we're veering off what is really the remit of this item agenda, and also the remit of the and so I agree on that. I think so. This is something really for officers to take up. And I'm pretty sure that they will, they follow the sort of guidance from the DFE on how to fund individual organisations. But Ian, do you want to just say something on this and maybe offer further clarity outside of the meeting on it?
Of course, I think, Robert, that's a really helpful suggestion. I'll talk to Iraklis, our head of early years, and really happy to get together separately with the 4 nursery schools to talk about this further. Some helpful points being raised, so we'll arrange that, and I'm sure it'd be helpful, Amit, to have you there as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, many thanks. Are there any more points specifically about this paper in A7 and the strategic direction around the decision the forum can take? Stephen?
Sorry, apologies. My question was actually in relation to those last comments, because if we're going to be reviewing shared sites, I wonder whether we can be open and consider also the split sites, so schools that are on more than one site.
the head of Maxill Goldborn.
Okay, I think this is something for officers and looking at how organisations are funded. Ian.
Sorry, just so the minutes are correct, I'm not proposing there's a meeting about how split sites and joint sites are funded. That won't be the purpose of the meeting. It would be to get together with our 4 maintained nursery schools and chairs, if they'd wish, to have a broader discussion about some of the points that have been raised. I wouldn't want this to impact on the kind of funding formula or for the minutes to be incorrect in that regard.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you, Ian. That's a good point there. Kitty, your hand is up, but I'm not sure if that was down from before.
Sorry, no, it wasn't. But I do think there's the unfairness or the apparent unfairness of funding is something which does need to be looked at.
Okay, well, I'm sure that if there is a meeting around that, I'm sure clarity can be brought to the meeting. I'm not sure I'd agree. We can brand it unfair until the details have been looked at. Chris.
Yes, I just wanted to say in relation to Councillor Atkinson's point in that, saying that, it might not be at the top of our agenda. I think when we come to this group, we're not coming as representatives of our own particular bailiwick. We're actually here to look at the things across the board. So I actually would be very interested in, not necessarily in this forum, but to be brought to this forum, a detailed unpicking of what that's all about, because I think we're here to represent, I don't want to sound like Pollyanna, but we're here to represent all children's education from, 0 up to whatever the age is. So I actually think that it is absolutely appropriate to take that away and bring something back so that we can unpick it. Because actually, at the end of the day, we're being asked to approve or not approve or agree recommendations. And we can't do that unless we have that detailed breakdown. So I think we're here. We need to leave our sort of personal sort of. I'm a primary chair of governors. I consider that all across the board is my area of responsibility in my position in this group. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks, Chris. David.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Chris has just said, and I don't think that Councillor Atkinson should have apologised. I think he's absolutely right what he said. This is about strategy, and I think as a body, as a forum, we have a responsibility to acknowledge that this is an incredibly important element of what we do. It's about accountability, and it's about futures thinking. Things will change. They are going to. Post the publication of the ISOS findings and the various working parties and the meetings that are currently taking place in a number of schools in regard to their futures, I think that strategy is absolute. And yes, I acknowledge that we don't have the time this evening, and it would be beyond our brief to look in detail at that. But I think that is very much something I would welcome. So I'm pleased to hear that officers are keen to go away and to revisit this in some detail.
Thank you, David. I don't think I agree with what you're saying. I don't think Councillor Atkinson was needed to apologise for anything or suggested he should. It was more that some of the things that are coming up now are not, as you said, in the remit of the meeting, or we're not going to find the answers here. And some of them are really the job of the officers of the borough to look after. In terms of recommendations, that actually on this paper, we're only asked to note 2 aspects, and that's the school forum is asked to note the use of the central elements of the early years block. Obviously, there's going to be some more detail broken down, and also to note, schools forum is asked to note the maintained nursery supplement funded by the DfE is conditional and subject to change after September 2021. So if we move on now to agenda item A8, which is the falling roles proposed allocations 2021-22. Just to note, we did talk about growth in the last meeting. That is going to come to the next meeting. But specifically here, Anita is going to talk through this paper on falling roles. Anita.
I'm passing the baton to Amit again on this one.
Okay, sorry, Amit, over to you.
That's fine. Yeah. So yeah, this is following the agreement of forum at the last forum of the criteria for falling roles. We've received this the bids from the 6 schools that would be eligible under that criteria, and they are meeting the criteria that was agreed. So the recommendation is that payment is made to those schools, and it's 110,000, slightly less than the estimated 112,000 that was included. One thing to mention though is that we are getting increasing numbers of schools with who are eligible for falling roles funding. So we're proposing that that we look at the criteria for next year as well.
Okay, thank you, Amit. I believe that we are going to be looking at criteria moving into the summer meeting. Ian and Anita might be able to confirm that. Obviously, it's always a concern to see that we're as a borough that we've got schools with falling roles. It's a concern, and I know through the work of ISOS that this is being looked at forensically and in more detail going forward. It's also concerning we've got a couple of new schools on there that haven't been on this list in previous years. Any questions on the falling roles funding, Stephen?
Sorry, it may be just my reading of it, but the criteria in 1.3 talks about returning to numbers within 3 years. But our minutes from the ISOS discussion at the last meeting, A5, talks about this being a challenge for the next 4 to 5 years. So I wondered whether there was any view on that.
Ian, over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. I think the point you've made is a helpful one. Clearly, I mean, it's worth saying that Schools Forum has a history of being very supportive to its schools where they are affected by falling roles, and there isn't any proposal this evening that the criteria, at such short notice going into the new financial year should change. I think all we're flagging is, given there is a slightly larger number of schools eligible for falling roles, and given, as colleagues have said, the findings in the ISOS report, it might be helpful at a future meeting, well in advance of the next financial year, to consider if we retain the current criteria or whether we amend them. And just to share with you, we did some similar work in Westminster a couple of years ago now, and we had a separate working group met a couple of times just to consider and review the criteria and bring proposals back. So that's only a suggestion. As I say, no proposals tonight that we change the criteria with effect for these schools. I don't think that'd be appropriate at such short notice.
Many thanks, Ian. Really helpful there. And any other questions on the falling roles proposed allocations? Okay, great, thank you. So in terms of the recommendations, Schools Forum are recommended to, in section 3 of that paper, allocate falling roles funds totaling £110,473 to schools meeting the criteria as shown in Appendix A of the paper, and also to agree that falling roles methodology for 2022-23 will be reviewed at, it says here, the January Schools Forum with other DSG arrangements, but I believe that there's work that is going to be done on that in advance of that meeting next January. Anita, can you just confirm that for clarity for members, and Ian?
Yes, I think in line of the discussions that we've been having here and the sort of the way the discussions have developed over the last week or so, I think we do need to bring it back before January.
Yeah, I think it's more that final decisions more than anything for when you do you inform the DFE. So can I just get members' agreement on the recommendations to in 3.1 and 3.12 that I just read out? Brilliant. Many thanks, everybody. We move now on to item A9, which is the proposed process and timetable for 2022-23 schools funding formula. So obviously, since the last meeting that we had a very long discussion about the schools funding formula, and officers have been away to look in detail as to how we can make this process a lot better, how we can be more inclusive of other stakeholders, particularly governors, primary head teachers. And I think Amanda alluded to that in a question at the start. And there is a proposal here, Anita, I believe that you're going to present on this, as to how we work towards agreeing the funding formula within a financial year, ready for that final decision that we make in January. Anita.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. So following on from what Andrew's just said, just want to add the point about the national funding formula, the hard national funding formula. So we now know that the earliest that can come in is 23-24. But there is speaking to DFE officials, there definitely is the intention for that to be introduced. I'm just mentioning that because that then drives the part of the principles that are included under section 3. So there's principles recommended, which then everything is built on from that, and will help us, if the forum agree with the principles that are in the paper, around moving further towards the national funding formula factor values, keeping consistency and fairness with all pupils of the same characteristics funded the same, and the aim not to increase the minimum funding guarantee significantly, which is something that had happened a couple of years ago when we took big steps towards the NFF. So they're the principles. And then in section 4, there is a proposed timetable, which is, as Andrew mentioned, it's trying to make sure this is open and inclusive as possible, and making it clear that we will be having discussions with the head teacher, both primary and secondary head teacher groups, seeking their views on the options that the forum agree that we consult on. And then there will be feedback that comes, the intention is there's feedback from those meetings that then goes into the forum paper where the decision is taken. Any options that we present will show how they compare to the national funding formula, factor values, and we will include a recommendation in the paper, which will, be, as I say, we'll take account of feedback and try and make it very clear of why an option is being proposed. And we hope that there can then be a consensus. If there's not, then obviously it would go to a vote of the forum.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's is that it in the broad brushstroke there, Anita?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Comments from forum members on this proposed timeline for looking at formula options? Okay, well, it seems that everybody's either fairly happy. There's a thumb up there. So the recommendations are for forum to agree the principles for agreeing the school's funding formula for 2022-23 budgets, to agree the process and timetable for agreeing the school's funding formula for 2022-23 budgets, and finally to note the subject to agreement of 5.1.2 that the school's funding formula options to be brought to the June 2021 schools forum. I hope that this will make it a more transparent and informative process for all parts of the sector that we're in. Do we get agreement to this? Hands up.
Yes, fine. Yeah. Yeah.
You need to mute yourself, David.
We can hear David agreeing and putting his thumbs up there. So that's really good, and hopefully that it will be quality conversations going forward, and hopefully next year we'll be in person having them rather than trying to do this on Teams. Moving on to item A10, which is the ISOS review, and I know that quite a lot of work has been done on this from local authority officers and the group since our last meeting, and just want to check. Amanda, are you starting off here, or is this going to be Ian?
Sorry, what am I starting off on?
Just this ISOS report update. I think it might be.
Sorry, I'm not reporting on this. I just wanted to bring up a point regarding ISOS, if I may, later.
Of course, yeah. Thank you, Ian. Over to you.
It's actually. Oh, sorry, Ian.
Not at all. Thanks, Andrew. Yes, I mean, first of all, worthwhile reflecting yet again on the great work that happened as part of the working group and the meetings that Amanda very helpfully chaired. And the agreements at the last working group was that we would go forward with meetings with the schools that had emerged as higher risk through the ISOS assessment tool. Really pleased to report that those meetings are well underway now. We had a helpful discussion at the working group actually about whether we should share the full list or not, and we agreed that we'd talk to primary heads about this. And what we agreed is that we would share the number of schools in each group, high, medium and low risk, rather than the names of the schools themselves. I personally felt that was a very helpful way forward. So through the ISOS tool, we had 9 schools identified as higher risk, and we're about halfway through with those meetings. And I recognise that some of the colleagues I've met with are on this call. So, firstly, a really big thank you from me for the spirit in which colleagues have approached those meetings. They've been really helpful, and I think as colleagues know, we've tried to focus on 2 main questions in those meetings. The first one has been, given the ISOS tool has been sent out now, in fact, to every school. We've also shared them with medium and lower risk schools as well. The question we've asked is, does the ISOS tool match your own school's self-evaluation or not? And where there are differences, can we discuss them? And that's been a really helpful first part of the meeting. And then secondly, where there perhaps is agreement or a common view as to where the school is and what the challenges are. The second question has been, well, what are your plans, and how can we as the borough assist with those, developing those plans and the delivery of them, and that's obviously sometimes in partnership with the local diocese as well. So the intention would be, and I look to Amanda and colleagues who are on the working group, to reconvene the working group after Easter. Once all of the 9 meetings have been completed, that they should be completed shortly after Easter. And the intention there would be to review some of the findings and the feedback from the meetings with the 9 schools, and then consider together how we might pull together a paper summarising some of those findings and proposals that would in turn then come to the 16th of June meeting. A particular focus for us within that work is around dealing with spare capacity and also maximising pupil numbers. But of course, the other recommendation that was accepted at Forum was around supporting schools with their strategic financial management, and that, of course, is the paper that Anita's about to introduce. But very happy, Andrew, to take any questions on what I've said so far, if that would be helpful.
I think if we get Anita to introduce the paper, and then we will take all the questions together, Ian, if that's okay. Anita, over to you.
Thank you. And so I had a nice introduction about how this leads into the financial management elements of the ISOS review and what was identified there. And if I go then into some of the solutions that we're proposing in relation to that, So in order to have some consistent and strong financial planning, and I'm not trying to say that that's an issue for the majority of schools, but there is an issue in some schools. So for consistency, we've looked at the tools available in the market, and we've identified that the Access Education tool is the one that is used by the largest number of schools nationally, and this tool allows budget planning for up to 5 years. If we were to purchase it at the local authority level, we'd be able to get about a 50% discount, which we could then pass on to schools. So we think it would, in terms of schools that use this, there's only 4 schools that use this package at the moment. But if other schools, if we purchase this on behalf of all schools, we think that that's a benefit in terms of the cost to individual schools. And it would then help us in terms of running any reports, both for schools forum or for internal use for where we had issues of concern. So that's our proposal on purchasing the access system. And then importantly, the other issue that's been, one of the other issues that's been identified is a need for training. So we are going to be offering some bite-sized training sessions for heads and governors, and we're about to start, and obviously I know that we've got the Easter holiday coming up, but we're collecting information in terms of what the training, what are the main training needs and what area do we focus our efforts on in this, and that will be progressing. And then we've also, for maintained schools, we're introducing automation in the regular financial returns, which a number of schools have trialled for us and tested, and given us very positive feedback across the borough, and we're now going to be introducing that across all schools as soon as we can in the new financial year. Lastly, I think I just want to mention we're flagging up we're not consulting on it yet, but we're just an early flag of what we're going to be including in when we come to consult on the scheme for financing schools in relation to the deadline for school budget plans. I will pause there.
Thank you, Anita, and Amanda. Obviously, we'll come to you now for the question that you raised earlier. Over to you.
Thank you. It's not so much a question. It's actually, well, I suppose it's partly a question. It's some comments and questions. So, as school forum members will hopefully remember, I reported at the last meeting, 18th of January meeting, under item A5, the work of the ISIS working group, in which we agreed a timetable for the process, which was reported to Schools Forum, and which Schools Forum agreed. In that timetable, it outlined the process by which the local authority would be discussing, as Ian mentioned, with the individual 9 schools at risk. The notion then was the feedback would come back, and the forum would be updated on the progress before all schools would be made aware of which schools were at risk. We've clearly overrun this timetable. We haven't had a progress paper, and I just wondered where we are with the timetable, and at what point schools more generally are going to find out which of the schools that are at risk, because this was something we were keeping private.
Ian, is that something that you want to answer?
Of course, Amanda, and happy to clarify that for forum. So you're absolutely right in referencing the timetable. First, 2 things to say. Firstly, through discussion with Anita in terms of that key recommendation about strategic financial planning, we felt that was the most helpful report to bring this evening in terms of addressing the ISOS recommendations. You're also right that we had that discussion about when and how names of schools would be shared. what I'm able to update you all on, and I hope colleagues feel this was the right approach, was I then had a further conversation with primary head teachers at their briefing and through the executive, and we agreed actually, take on board everybody's views. It perhaps wouldn't be helpful to share the names of schools and the list more widely, but instead to share the numbers of schools in each risk group, and that, if you like, very much aligned with the work that Richard and his team do with regard to school improvement. We do have a locally agreed categorisation process. We don't share that categorisation as a whole list, but each school is aware of it and is able to discuss it. And we adopted, I think, with the agreement of heads, a number of whom are on the call, that we take the same approach here in terms of the ISOS, the list, if you like.
But sorry, and I'm sorry, I'm probably about to be a bit pedantic here, but the ISOS working group obviously took its brief from the schools forum, sort of delegated authority. We made a decision, and it would seem to be that officers therefore have gone off and done their own thing without taking any direction from the group.
Well, Amanda, you're right in saying that we didn't
come back to
the group. I'm sorry. And you're absolutely right to say that, Amanda. And I suppose it's worth, we had a conversation only earlier last week, in fact, at Heads Executive about this. And, I do want to acknowledge that this is a very anxious time for schools. We want to conduct this process in a very transparent and open way. All the data that ISOS used is publicly available data. But actually, when a number of colleagues made the point after the working group that there's rather the list of names wasn't shared, I respected that, and I absolutely hear your point that I should have perhaps written back to the working group to confirm that I agreed with heads we shouldn't do that. But I hope colleagues feel that was a sensible change in light of the feedback, and I think the fact we've had such productive individual conversations with schools is also proof of that perhaps being the best way to go.
I think it's entirely understandable. What I want to understand, though, is, as you've mentioned, we're going to have another meeting after Easter, that forum directs the working group about what it is it's expecting to be achieved. So, in other words, when working group, the last meeting, which I didn't have the notes for, but the last meeting we did discuss about, at which meeting is schools forum going to be expected to make a decision. By that point, they're going to have to know which schools are in the mix, and it's just getting some idea of what the brief of the working group is.
No, indeed, if I may, Andrew, that's really helpful, Amanda. And what I would say is, given we're working, I hope colleagues feel we're working together as a system here to take forward change together where change is needed. When those agreements have been reached with schools and individual governing bodies, and that might be about, let's say, a reduction in the published admission number, and that might be something that governors have formally agreed at that stage. After that decision is taken, of course, it would be reported back formally to Schools Forum, and then Schools Forum can give a view in the round as to whether they support the decisions and proposals that the individual governing bodies have put forward.
Thank you.
Yeah. Many thanks, and I think we have to recognise that. Well, firstly, this is the conversations that we're having here they're difficult conversations with schools, and they're not easy. And I suppose that Ian's job as the Director of Education is to, in the field, mitigate and temper and understand some of these problems. So I think there maybe needs to be, going forward, just some smoothing over of how some of these things work. It is a bit of a moving feast at the minute, but agreed. I think certainly go back to the working party with some of these things will be ideal in the future. But many thanks for that. We've got a number of other questions here. Chris.
Sorry, if I may, I've got three things that I'd like to raise. The first is in relation to training, which is very quick. It's referred to as finance training. I think we don't really need finance training. We could actually balance our books. And I'm speaking personally now as a chair of governors, in normal circumstances. What we need is training in relation to what I call in my business service redesign, restructure. Those are the sorts of things. And I'm assuming that the finance training is wide enough to actually embrace that. So it's not about the actual detail of finance, because I think we'd all do that in normal circumstances. So I'm hoping that it would be a wider thing than that. This is a more difficult one, the second thing, in relation to transparency. I think that one of the things that I've had to deal with, and I put my hand up here to being part of the North Kensington thing, in that, although the issue is in relation to timing and transparency, is that we probably should have paid more attention, and this isn't a criticism of anybody, because we're doing this very quickly because we need to, but actually there is this whole thing about how you inform individual schools or groups of schools about the fact that they are part of the 9 or part of the wider group, or because it's people's livelihoods, and they're very, very anxious, and they're working really, really hard, and they feel undervalued in those circumstances. So and the other thing I would say is that I don't know how much it is helpful to the overall cause of this piece of work, in relation where we're looking to develop partnerships, to actually still be working in silos. So actually only individual schools know about their own individual situations. And that, I just throw that out there. I haven't got a solution, because, it's a very, very difficult thing to organise. But just the third thing I wanted to say, and this is slightly off of this subject. When I was at the Chairs Forum earlier in the month, speaking to Richard Stanley, asking him about the Education Partnership Board and the establishment of that board, and whether there were any terms of reference, and whether there was any clear sort of information about how that was being formed, who was on it, exactly what their roles are, what the role is in relation to terms of reference. And I wonder whether perhaps Ian could say whether there's been any progress, because Richard was very helpful, but he wasn't able to give the detail that I was asking for. So 3 things there. Thank you.
Ian.
I'm just demuting myself. No, thank you, Chris. Really helpful points. Just in relation to the Education Partnership Board, as I said at the last meeting, really helpful feedback from heads and chairs, from Amanda, on developing the terms of reference. I can confirm that we've now taken them to our cabinet member, Councillor Josh Randall, and he's also happy with the proposed terms of reference. As you know, my colleague Sarah Newman, who's part of the meeting, will be chairing the meeting. We have had a discussion about the timing of the first meeting, and given the extraordinary times we're in, and the fact that schools have just returned, we thought it might be more helpful to convene the first meeting after Easter, probably in May, which gives us time then to approach our head teacher and chairs forum chairs to then seek nominations in line with the terms of reference for a first meeting in May. So the intention is, as soon as we get back after Easter, I'll say something in my head's letter about it, but also then work with colleagues to seek nominations. I hope that's helpful, Chris. I mean, just going back to your earlier point in terms of the role of the Education Partnership Board in relation to the ISOS recommendations and what schools might propose. Ultimately, those are decisions for each governing body, where we do have clear proposals. They would come to schools forum, but ultimately perhaps not to the first meeting of the partnership board in May, but perhaps to a subsequent meeting. Those proposals will also come to that board, and I think the role of the board would be to maybe ask some questions about the governing body's proposal, and ultimately to decide whether to support it or not.
Very clear, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Chris. Lucian.
going back to the presentation about the Access software and the budgeting, I just wanted to let the forum know that I use it myself at Chelsea Academy, and I highly recommend it. And I don't think people are going to need a significant amount of training on it because it is very self-explanatory. Yeah, I'd just like to say it's a great piece of kit that I've been using for a long time, and I would highly recommend. Thank you.
Lucian, thank you. They were really helpful there to know that and to offer assurances. David.
Yeah, just to go back to what Amanda was talking about and Ian's response. So, in terms of Amanda, yeah, I think you're right. You know, you are being pedantic, but I think that's what we're supposed to be, isn't it? So I think what you're saying is absolutely right. And there have been a couple of times when we've been tasked with doing X, Y, or Z in the name of the working party, but then somehow that's got lost in the ether post those meetings. But in Ian's defence, there was quite a long period between Amanda chairing the ISOS working party and then in real terms, officers contacting schools, probably far too long, to be honest. I think that should have happened sooner. But I'm mindful that capacity is stretched. It's very limited at the moment. With Andrew's departure in January, I think that that's had huge ramifications. No offence at all, Anita. I think you're doing a very good job, but it's a very significant player who would have, let's be honest, been leading on this. His absence is noted. But I think what Ian tried to do was, with that very long period, the run-in, far too long, I think what he's trying to do is just adapt to the circumstances that arose. And I think it did become increasingly clear that some schools were understandably struggling. I think Chair, you'd already alluded to the fact that this is a very difficult situation for those 9 schools. And I think what Ian was trying to do there was to be supportive.
Thank you, David. Ian, did you want to come back on that? I know we've got Stephen and Peter coming up.
Apologies, that was an old hand, Andrew. I do apologise.
Okay. Stephen.
Apologies for the delay there. Just like Lucian, we use Access ourselves, so I'm going to put my card on the table and say I think the proposal is a good one, and I can see the benefit from it, but I am a little bit confused about how this fits in with ISOS. Is it for the high-risk schools to support them, or is it just for maintained schools? And was the ISOS report actually about all schools in the borough, or is this a matter just for maintained schools? I think also I'm not really sure about the cost implications. Are we talking about paying for it every year going forwards? Is it an initial amount of funding, or is it just for the training? Because if it's, there are different outcomes from the answer to that question, really, because it seems a little bit unfair if we're paying for some schools to have their software when everyone else has to pay for it. And I would have thought that whatever system they're working from, there's still ways the local authority could retrieve the reports themselves directly if that's the priority. Sorry, there's lots of questions there. I suppose the first one is, how much is it going to cost, and who is benefiting from it? It's all schools or just the high-risk schools?
Thank you, Stephen. Really good questions there. And good to hear someone else who's using this. I think my understanding is all schools, but Anita, can you confirm and clarify that?
Yes, certainly. So while the ISOS review was all schools, sorry, I can't get my words out. This Access Education, we can purchase it on behalf of maintained schools, but we would be passing the cost on. We're not suggesting that this is charged to the DSG for the point that Stephen makes, because only some schools would benefit from that. And it's so that we've got there's consistency in the way that future years budgets are calculated and the information that's included in the financial planning. So to try and help schools and to help us being able to support schools in using a tool.
Okay, thank you, Anita. Stephen, does that answer your questions?
Yes, I think it does. I was feeling that the document as it was written was sort of implying that some schools would benefit and others wouldn't. So I think I feel greatly relieved. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Peter.
Thank you. Can I follow up what Chris said about to Ian Higgs, which I don't think he quite fully answered. We have a particular problem in the west area of the northern planning area, where there are a number of schools, and I won't name them, who were identified in the study as being at risk. How are those schools going to tell, or at least be informed that there are other schools in the area that might be willing to discuss cooperation or federation agreements with? Because some sort of rationalization in that geographical area is, well, it's worth talking about at least, if not considering in some depth. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Ian, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Yes, and thank you, Peter. It's that stage of the evening. I promise you that I haven't fully answered that point. I mean, I would say the meetings we've had so far, and also maybe it's also worth flagging that the meetings that we've had do reflect the different recommendations that came through from the ISOS report. So where schools need particular support around deficit recovery planning, for instance, it's been really helpful to have Anita join me at those meetings. Where it has linked more to strategic partnership working, Richard has joined me, and I think that discussion, Peter, about partnership working, potential federations, works both ways. So in some of the meetings we've had, schools themselves have put forward proposals, said they're really up for it and would like some support, or they put forward a proposal working already with a school and if you like, sought the endorsement and further support of the local authority. So for any school that would like that support, the door is open, but not only for the higher risk schools, but also for those medium and low risk schools that have also now received their individual ISOS tool. We do have a lead advisor structure. There is a nominated lead advisor for each school, and I know that they're doing that work week in, week out with schools to support partnership where partnership is right. It might be informal, it might be a memorandum of understanding, or it may be around moving to a formal hard federation, as has just happened only fairly recently with two primary schools in the north of the borough.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Chris, is that a new hand?
I'm afraid it is, yes. Sorry. Just a couple of things. I just wanted to be absolutely clear that the issue about the finance package is very different to the finance training. So I'm not. I just want to separate out the two. The other thing is that just to go back to what I was saying earlier, one of the things that I think we should be looking at in this forum is not at sort of things being unfair because they're advantaging one sector more than the other. But my understanding is that what we want to do is to maintain, and I'm talking about the north of the borough because I'm guessing, although I'm guessing probably that not all of them, but the significant number of those 9 schools identified are going to be in the north of the borough, is that as a forum, we are responsible for ensuring that, primary education is maintained in the north of the borough. And it's not about whether if you push a bit more money that way, it's going to be unfair. I just think we need to step back a bit from that and think, well, if this financial package is actually going to help, I think it would help the borough more than the schools, actually, from the sounds of it. But then actually that's something that we need to be thinking of as stepping back from our own individual situations in relation to our own areas of responsibility. And I don't want to sound, is it Stephen? Sorry, I don't want to sound like I'm being, yes, sorry. So,
it's okay, yeah. I actually agree with you. I do think it's more about training and people being ready for structural change, but
And
Andrew,
it's Alison Mould. I have to disappear because we have a governors meeting at 7 o'clock. So if I could just leave and give you my apologies.
No problem, Alison. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Thank you. Take care. Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think that is a really good point. I think certainly from my understanding of the software package, there will be benefits to using it for understanding. Because, you know, operationally, some of the software that schools have been using for years don't provide any analysis in-house. But you are absolutely right. It's about making strategic decisions around staffing often that schools need and leaders and governors need more training in. So I think that is potentially something that needs to be looked at by officers as well, in terms of how that is delivered. Probably first and foremost to head to their consultatives. Are there any other questions on this paper? Okay, great, thank you. There are a couple of recommendations here in part 4. In 4.1, to agree the purchase of the Access Education Budget Planning Tool for all maintained schools at a discounted price. To agree the inclusion of the budget plan deadline being brought forward in the consultation changes to the scheme of financing schools later in the year. And then finally, just to note that head teachers and in exceptional circumstances, chairs of governors will be contacted where schools do not submit financial returns in accordance with RBKC deadlines. Hands up for a agreement on that paper and those items. Okay, thank you, everybody. I ask the committee to note that report, and we move on to item A11, which is the DFE High Needs Funding Consultation. And I'm going to hand over to Anita on this.
Yeah, thank you. So in summary, the consultation that the DFE are doing about the high needs funding is really pretty minor, tinkering at the edges. We all know, and as we've been discussing on the deficit management plan, that there's not enough money in the system, and there's nothing in this consultation about the overall level of funding. The responses to the consultation around what's called the historic spend factor, the proposals would help Kensington and Chelsea, would be likely to give more funding and would be likely to give the vast majority of London authorities more funding. So that's what we've put into our response to the DFE. And the other key thing that we're all waiting for is the fuller second part of the SEND consultation, which responses have previously been provided, and that will cover, in terms of the funding areas, it's likely to cover things like whether it's appropriate that it's still the first £6,000 that schools pay for EHCPs, whether the £10,000 for the special resource-based placements is the correct value, all those sorts of things. So it's really mainly for information, and as I say, fairly minor changes proposed.
Okay, thank you, Anita. Forum members, are there any questions or things that anyone wants to raise on this paper to Anita or with Anita? Great. Okay. We have one recommendation, but it's actually just a note, and that's 6.1. Schools Forum is asked to note the response to the DFE High Needs Funding Consultation, and ask the committee to note that report. And finally, we move on to item A12. Any other business? Raise your hand now if you have anything you'd like to raise. Fantastic. So apologies. Oh, Peter, you got in there. Peter, over to you.
Budget monitoring meeting last week, at which we're owed 60,000 in VAT refund, and I suspect other primary schools, at least in the borough, are in a similar position. This is about 1.5% of our combined federation budget, so it's actually not immaterial. Can you give us some update as to when we might receive it?
Yes, thank you, Peter. This is an issue for all schools and pertinent to some of the conversations, particularly schools with more financial pressures and now issues sort of with cash flow. So Anita, could you just update on what the VAT situation is and when all schools are going to receive those payments? But actually, is it potentially worth prioritising some schools first?
Yeah, thanks for raising that, Peter. Yes, I mean, I won't go into all the details, but the problem has arisen because of the way that we have to report on the VAT information to HMRC and how that's then fed through the systems, and it's mainly about where there's invoices where there's mixed suppliers and therefore mixed rates of VAT, and us getting the correct information from schools. And we were a bit slow in realising that we weren't getting the appropriate information. Anyway, where are we now? We're now going through and dealing with the backlogs and getting the amendments for all of the individual schools so that we can make those payments as soon as possible. However, we, as always, if any school does have a cash flow issue, we will pay out advances, and we have been paying out cash advances to schools where this has caused a cash problem. So we have paid out more cash advances. So please do contact the team if you need a cash advance to deal with this. But we are getting through these and dealing with these as soon as we possibly can.
Okay, many thanks, Anita. Can you just clarify for forum members how many cash advances have you had to make? How many schools has that been?
So some of the cash advances are to do with the deficit position in schools or those that are heading, but we have been doing cash advances to about 8 schools at this time. But if others do need it, then please do not hesitate to request those. Okay,
so hopefully we'll rectify this ASAP and also going forward, because obviously for school business managers that there is a stress and a strain to worrying about these things, particularly when it comes to payroll. So yeah, I think it might be something that we'll come back to further down the line to make sure that it is all squared away and sorted at your level.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Any other business? Okay, fantastic. Thank you, everybody. It was lovely to see all of you. And as I said at the start of the meeting, rule dependent, hopefully we will be able to see each other in person at the next meeting. So fingers crossed for that. And that concludes this meeting of the Schools Forum. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thanks very much. Good night, everybody.